The following radio program is for informational purposes only and is neither specific nor tailored financial advice to any individual. It is not intended as an offer or solicitation for the purchase or sale of any financial instrument. Always do your own due diligence and consult a financial advisor before making any investments. Investing involves risk, which can result in the loss of any or all principal. Peter Weitz is a registered investment advisor with Fusion Analytics Investment Partners, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor, as well as a registered rep with Fusion Analytics Securities, LLC, a FINRA registered broker-dealer and SIPC member. All views expressed in this program are those of the host or guests and do not reflect the opinions of Fusion Analytics Investment Partners nor its affiliates. Your investments. How secure are you that they are secure? Do you want to know more about investing, retirement, and moving to the next level in business? Welcome to In Black and Whites, featuring host Peter Weitz. Our program will answer all of the questions about your future and so much more. It's all about smart business and smarter investing. Now, here is your host, Peter Weitz.
Hi, thanks. Welcome back to the program. I'm your host, Peter Weitz. A big shout out to Kevin Lane for being on the program last week talking about a stock pickers market, and we did get a lot of good feedback on that show. Today's show is going to be different, and it's going to cross a different path than what we've done in the past. And I've been fortunate enough to be introduced to a local craft brewer. And today we're going to talk about craft brewing and the craft brewing craze in the United States and the growth of that. But more importantly, what we're going to talk about is how, and I think what's interesting here is that we've got a school teacher who I'm going to introduce in just a moment, who met up with a neighbor, and they just decided to pool resources and go into the craft brewing business, which I think is amazing. And I think the point of that is that a local small time person with just hopes and dreams can build a business based upon their desire to want to make it happen. And I think we're going to focus on the psychology of that a little bit, but. Before we do, let me introduce today's guest real quickly. He's a great guy. His name's Peter Anderson, and just a little bit about him. He moved to Florida from California about when he was 19 years old. He had $800 in his pocket, a surfboard, a microwave oven, and a large back seat in his car. And he met the woman of his dreams. They've been married 22 years. They have a teenage daughter, but on the business front, he is a graduate in sociology from Sonoma State University in Northern California, and he has a master's in teaching from Gonzaga in Spokane. But he spent the better part of his 20s and 30s doing social work, but got into teaching about 10 years ago. But here's where it becomes interesting. He's still an elementary school teacher as of today, and we're lucky to have him because we're in a summer recess here in Florida. But he started brewing beer in the early 90s in California when a friend gave him just a basic kit. So he was just, brewing in his house, small time for himself, but he got hooked on it. And he continued brewing while he lived in Portland and into Spokane. And he always talked about one day opening up a pub because he thought that it would be really cool and it would really follow his passion for good quality beer making. And so one morning, he and his wife were sitting on the back patio, or I guess it was one evening, I should say. They got a little fire going in the chimney, and the joint, knocking down a couple of ales, and his wife looked up in the clouds, and she noticed a character in the clouds. It looked like one of the characters on The Simpsons. And the two of them looked at each other, and they mentioned the word pareidolia. And for those that don't know, pareidolia is the word. It's a psychological term for when we see faces or other objects in places where there really isn't a face. So, for example, the grill of a car, a tree ring or a piece of toast, etc. So like when you look at the clouds and you think you see something, that effect is called pareidolia. So, without further ado, welcome to the program, Pete Anderson, the CEO of the Pareidolia Brewing Company. Good morning, Peter.
Good morning, Peter. Thanks for having me on.
And joining him is also his other chief brewer, Jim Scortino. And we're going to go back and forth with them a little bit here. But Pete, just start out by telling the listeners sort of how you got into this whole, craft brewing craze and how you started to decide you wanted to open up your own brew pub, and how you really get into it.
Well, I had been going to brew fests and visiting breweries for, the better part of 20 years in different states, and I always admired just the craftsmanship involved in making good beer. It's not something that you can just throw together. Put a lot of thought into that. And it just occurred to me that, we travel a lot to go get good beer. It really is great to have good beer here, right here in our own town.
And so you had been making beer in your home, and you had tried different flavors. I mean, how do you come up with the chemistry to determine how to make a beer?
Great question. I think, first of all, what we think of is, what do we like to drink? And if you start there and say, well, I like this particular style of beer, I'm going to go about trying to make that kind of beer that I like to drink, and the philosophy being, if I like it, someone else will probably like it too. You start looking at the different kinds of grains that you can use, the different barleys, the different hops, where you're brewing your beer. The water is a huge factor in that. The beer I make in Florida takes a little bit more thought than the beer I made in Spokane, where the water came from snowmelt in an underground aquifer. So there are a lot of chemistry kind of concerns. And Jim, maybe you want to add a little bit to that too.
Yeah. Right now we filter our water here. I brew a traditional kind of beer, which I know a lot of the newer brewers add a bunch of extras to their beer, extra flavorings and extra. But I believe in just grain and hops, which Pete's trying to get me over that. But the biggest thing about brewing beer is consistency in temperatures, consistency in the grain and the quality of the grain you buy, freshness of your hops, and putting these all together to come up with the recipe you want.
So let me take a step back, and I want to get back to that in a minute. But all right, so the two of you are neighbors, and you both enjoy beer, and you both enjoy brewing beer, and now you decide to take this hobby, if you will, and turn it into a business. And you broke ground on a facility, which we'll get to in just a moment, and I know what plans on opening here shortly. But all of a sudden now your mindset has to change, because you have to take your own personal opinions and put them aside and decide now you got to make beer that everybody else wants to buy and drink. And so what was your line of thinking? What went through your mind in saying, okay, how are we going to make this a business?
I think first you have to accept the fact that you're a little bit crazy when you're brewing beer. There's a little bit of that going on, but exactly what you're saying, it's a little scary when you're taking something that you've enjoyed in your home and maybe shared with friends and family, and you're willing to take that risk and put it out there to people you may not know. I think it was a combination of things. We were members of a home brewers club, which had over 80 members, and part of that membership was bringing our own beer to the club for others to try and critique. And so that was kind of our first foray into, let's see what other people think of our beer. And many of the club members were really giving Jim and I both high marks and compliments on the beer that we were bringing to the club. So we thought, well, if these guys are really into beer as much as we are and they like it, it really is only not, the next step is to take it out to the public and just see how they respond. So I just looked at this area. We both agreed this area was lacking in a craft beer location. We have to drive 20 minutes in either direction, really, to go find craft beer in our area. It only made sense that we would put one on the map here with the beer that we've been making.
And so you have your formula, you make your beer, but what, now all of a sudden you're buying, more product to manufacture. You're making more beer than you used to. I mean, how did you know where to go to set up, agreements to buy the product at reasonable prices? And, how did you know? Did you create a business plan? Did you meet with different distributors? Did you talk to other, brew makers? I mean, how did you come up with this whole, how do we turn it into a business thought?
Oh, we have some other friends who own some friends of mine that own a brewery, and I've become friends with them and talked to them about their suppliers. We've done some online research for suppliers. And when you have any kind of business, I own another business too, suppliers actually search you out. So in a lot of cases, we don't have to do a lot of research to find who's going to give us the best deal on grains or hops or whatever other supplies we're going to need. So that part of it's actually probably the easiest part of it. The hardest part of it might be setting up the actual equipment and learning how to work it. Going from my system at home is a 15-gallon system, and we're going from that to a 55-gallon system, which is still a fairly small system, with hopes of going to maybe a 7-barrel system in the future. But the biggest problem is not the supply. It's not materials. The biggest problem is learning how to use bigger equipment.
Right, and how to keep your beer consistent, making a much larger portion, I'd imagine.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing, and the newer system we have now is electronically controlled, so it should be a little easier to brew consistent beer. We've run some test batches and have been very happy with what we've come out with. We're really hoping that continues.
Yeah, our first test batches, the people who we've been able to let try that, the reviews are fantastic. So my feeling is if Jim and I are doing good beer now in our early stages of this new system, it's only going to get better as we get it more figured out. But going back to your original question, I think you start on the Internet. It's just such a great resource now. We can find suppliers of hops that are grown in New Zealand, for example. We can get hops or grain grown pretty much anywhere in the world, just a few clicks away.
And that's pretty cool. The other thing that I kind of want to harp on this point as we go through the show today is that I like the idea that you guys are both starting really small. So yet you have this dream and you have this vision, but you're not biting off more than you can chew, and you're going to make a small amount of beer. And when it catches on and revenue's there, you can grow methodically in that regard. And I think that's a phenomenal strategy.
Exactly. That's what we felt. We looked originally at going into a warehouse setup and doing it that way. We ended up coming back to just a small retail location with a nice view. To keep a small pub full, we felt was better than to keep a big empty warehouse. So we're starting small. We do have plans down the road, hopefully, if things go well and we're well received in our area, where we would go to a bigger warehouse, as Jim said, with much bigger brewing capacity. But we want to get everything figured out on a small scale first. We want to give people, a place in this local area to really introduce many people who have no prior experience to craft beer. We want to give them a place to come and feel comfortable and experiment a little bit. Craft beer can be really fun.
Yeah, and I think that's the cool part about it. Guys, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I want to talk about this growth of the craft beer industry and as a whole. You're listening to the In Black and White's radio program on Voice America Business.
When it comes to business, you'll find the experts here. Voice America Business Network.
ERISA 408B2, fiduciary standards, safe harbor, fidelity bonds, record keepers, discrimination testing. I am so confused.
Does your 401k plan have more questions than answers? Peter Weitz and his team of 401k experts have a solution. Their on-site service model distinguishes them from other service providers, and they are specialists in 401k costs, regulations, and compliance. If your 401k plan has more questions than answers, then contact Peter at 877-945-2888 or email him at peter@inblackandwhites.com.
Climbing Mount Everest is an amazing feat, and many have died trying to do so. However, more people have died descending Mount Everest than in reaching the summit. Part of the problem may be that people are so focused on reaching their objective that they fail to plan appropriately for what they will do or should be prepared for afterward. Similarly, people are so focused on saving for retirement and reaching retirement that they fail to plan appropriately for what they will encounter once they have actually retired. With 1 out of every 4 65-year-olds today living past the age of 90, you may be retired longer than you are actually working. Have you devised a plan, process, and discipline to ensure that you will not run out of money? If you are not sure what to do, then simply contact Peter Weitz and his retirement team at Fusion Analytics. We help manage human emotions using 3 proprietary investment techniques. Our job is to evaluate the forces that the typical investor can't see so that wealth is preserved and not lost. Find out more at inblackandwhites.com. Weitz is spelled W-E-I-T-Z. Email Peter at inblackandwhites.com. In Black and Whites, we win by not losing.
When it comes to business, you'll find the experts here. Voice America Business Network.
You are listening to In Black and Whites. To reach Peter Weitz or his guest today, please call 1-866-472-5790. That's 1-866-472-5790. You may also send an email to peter@inblackandwhites.com. Weitz is spelled W-E-I-T-Z. Email Peter at inblackandwhites.com. Now, back to this week's program.
Hi, thanks. Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Peter Weitz. We're joined today by Peter Anderson and his partner, Jim Scortino, the owners of the Paradolia Brewing Company. And I just want to make sure, if you want to go to their blog, which is on their website, I just want to spell Paradolia for you. It's spelled P-A-R-E-I-D-O-L-I-A brewing.com. ParadoliaBrewing.com. There's all kinds of interesting information about their beer and brewing process. Tells you a little bit about their location, which is opening in a couple of weeks in Sebastian, Florida, which is a nice little town in the middle of the state, right up against the water, a little bit south of Daytona Beach. So if you ever happen to be in the area, Paradolia Brewing in Sebastian, Florida. But anyway, prior to the break, we were talking about how they got started. And we talked a little bit about sourcing information, sourcing supply and product. And, guys, I'm wondering if you can tell me, just out of curiosity, where exactly do all your supplies come from? You mentioned hops from New Zealand. I mean, are they mostly domestic? Are you United States-based products? Or are they from all over the world? And, sort of how's that mix work?
Sure. I think most of our suppliers are going to be U.S. Oregon, Washington, very big hop growing areas, and the Midwest, Wisconsin, Iowa, places like that are going to be growing the barley.
Right.
A big chunk of where we're getting our materials are going to be U.S. grown for sure. Those New Zealand hops and some other hops, those are just to make some exotic flavors and just to kind of experiment a little bit.
And we might, if we were going to do an English bitter, let's say, we would probably use an English grain to make it original, and an English hop. So it would really depend on the variety of beer we were going to make as to where we would source. Our standard beers usually use U.S. products.
Yeah, and then you made a reference earlier to filtering the water. And I know, coming from the Pacific Northwest, you might have had some kind of spring or something like that. I mean, what exactly do you need to do to the water, and how do you decide what you need to filter?
Well, because our water supply in Sebastian is chlorinated city water, we don't have any other access. We have to use a carbon filter just to remove the chlorine, and that's what we do for our water here. As you get more in depth, if you do an English beer, their water is really hard, and you would have to add some chemicals to that water to match the water that's in England to get an original tasting beer. So those are the things you'd have to do some chemistry on the water. Right now, we're just using water filtered from Sebastian. I have a place in Hendersonville, North Carolina, on a spring. And I bring some of that water back, and there's a big difference, and that's very soft water. And that makes a very big difference in the beer when you make it. So I think we're going to have to experiment a little bit with our water quality, and we're going to come up with different beers based on that.
Yeah, Yeah, we've tried reverse osmosis. We've tried charcoal filtering. And like Jim said, it really depends on the style of beer. Sometimes you actually have to add some minerals to your water just to get that correct balance that you need for a particular style of beer.
Yeah, and that's interesting. I mean, do either of you have a background in chemistry or anything like that?
Not at all.
No.
Neither do I. But reverse osmosis sounds pretty complicated.
But again, back to the internet, what a great resource.
Yeah, good point. Good point. So a statistic came out from the Brewers Association that said, and we were talking about this earlier, and I actually happened to see it from the CNBC reporter Darren Ravel this morning, and it said there are more than 3,000 craft beer brewers in the United States, according to the Brewers Association. And his question was, is this good growth or a bubble? And if you were to go back to 2010, according to the statistics from the association, there were 1,625 craft brewers in the United States. And as of June 30th of this year, there's a little over 3,040, according to their data. And so, guys, I'm going to ask you the question. Is that good growth or is it a bubble?
I think it's good growth. I think what we're seeing is part of a bigger trend of decentralization. I think there's a big movement right now in a lot of parts of the country to go back to being local, like farmers markets, getting our produce closer to home, buying made in the USA. I think there's a trend that's coming back where people really are looking to support each other in a community. And craft beer is like the perfect fit for that. You could have several small breweries in one community, and everybody would still do okay because each one has its own flavors, its own feel, but it's all local. For example, I've already established a contact that when our grain has done its job and made our beer, I'm donating the grain to a local farmer to feed his cows, which in turn will become part of the food supply for the area. So I think it's kind of indicative that people are going back to, instead of going big, they're going smaller and going local.
Yeah, and I would, to add to that, I think, you make the comment about the farmer's market. I mean, I think you find that the quality of what you're buying is not only competitive price-wise, but is significantly better than what you get from the big box retailers.
Right. I saw a bumper sticker in Asheville last month, and it said, without farmers, there's no beer, which is so true. And
right.
If the law allowed it, I think you'd see craft brewers at farmers markets selling their beer.
And so now you've got all this. I mean, what kind of requirements from the ATF are you under? Are there certain limitations for you to manufacture and sell, and how does that work?
I would say the biggest requirement is, can you measure your beer for tax purposes? The federal government really just wants you to document pretty much every drop that flows out of your tanks that will be served to the public. That's probably the biggest hurdle, is making sure that you can document all of that on a regular basis. In the event they come in and take a look at your operation, you have to be able to tell them where your beer is, what stage, how much you're making. One of the inspectors gave me a good analogy. He said, treat each beer like it's a birth. When was it born? Where did it go after it got a little older? And where is it heading from there? And if you document all of that, you should be fine. So I thought that was kind of a good analogy. Treat each beer like it's a child.
Yeah, and then so you guys are going into the retail side, so I'd imagine you have to have a beer license to sell it as well, correct?
Correct. We are dealing with city, county, state, and federal. To put it shortly, we're dealing with every level of government you can imagine. So I don't want to gloss it over and make it sound like it's been a walk in the park. But you can get through it. If anybody out there is thinking of doing this and pursuing their dream, you can get through it. Just be patient, and my personal opinion is just treat everybody nicely, and they'll do what they can to help you get through it.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that. So it sounds like it's a pretty convoluted process, and I know that it's something that the both of you have been thinking about for years. But, in our conversations, Pete, you said, hey, look, I started really this project in January of 2014, and here it is almost the 1st of August, and you're getting ready to open up a retail operation.
Yeah,
so I'd say, you've accomplished a lot in 8 months.
Yeah, I think to the shock of many, especially those who have opened before us, they're shocked at how quickly this is going. But at this point, I see no reason to, drag our feet. We want to be the first brewery in this town, and you can't do that by sitting back and relaxing. So, it's been a lot of legwork on our part, a lot of phone calls, and honestly, relying a lot on just the kindness of other people and friends to really just kind of help us get through all of this.
Yeah, and obviously that always helps in getting a business started. And what I really like about your business is I like the scalability of it. And I like that, you went from how much beer were you guys making at home?
I used to make 15-gallon batches is my setup, so it'd be approximately 3 kegs of beer. 6 tells would be 5-gallon kegs at a time. And when I was busy, when I was brewing a lot, I would do that a couple times a month, so 6 kegs a month.
And that's probably about where I was when, you go through moments where there's a term that people may not have heard of. It's called beer broke. And beer broke is when you invite your friends over and they like your beer so much and it's free, you find shortly that your keg's empty and your beer broke. And the whole process of making beer realistically takes you about a month from the recipe to the brewing to the fermenting to the point where you can actually drink it. So when your beer broke, you're looking at least 3 to 4 weeks before you're going to have more beer back in your refrigerator.
And so that's a great point. And make sure you check out the Twitter account with my new hashtag BeerBroke. But maybe that'll catch on. Hey, guys, we're going to take a quick break. When we get back, I want to talk more about sort of this transformation from homebrew manufacturing in your 6 kegs into now building for the masses and what the differences are. And we're going to do that in just a minute. You're listening to the In Black and Whites program on the Voice America Business Channel.
From the boardroom to you, Voice America Business Network.
Climbing Mount Everest is an amazing feat, and many have died trying to do so. However, more people have died descending Mount Everest than in reaching the summit. Part of the problem may be that people are so focused on reaching their objective that they fail to plan appropriately for what they will do or should be prepared for afterward. Similarly, people are so focused on saving for retirement and reaching retirement that they fail to plan appropriately for what they will encounter once they have actually retired. With 1 out of every 4 65-year-olds today living past the age of 90, you may be retired longer than you are actually working. Have you devised a plan, process, and discipline to ensure that you will not run out of money? If you are not sure what to do, then simply contact Peter Weitz and his retirement team at Fusion Analytics. We help manage human emotions using 3 proprietary investment techniques. Our job is to evaluate the forces that the typical investor can't see so that wealth is preserved and not lost. Find out more at inblackandwhites.com. Weitz is spelled W-E-I-T-Z. Email Peter at inblackandwhites.com. In Black and Whites, we win by not losing.
ERISA 408B2, fiduciary standards, safe harbor, fidelity bonds, record keepers, discrimination testing. I am so confused.
Does your 401k plan have more questions than answers? Peter Weitz and his team of 401k experts have a solution. Their on-site service model distinguishes them from other service providers, and they are specialists in 401k costs, regulations, and compliance. If your 401k plan has more questions than answers, then contact Peter at 877-945-2888 or email him at peter@inblackandwhites.com.
Voice America Business Network. The bottom line in business.
You are listening to In Black and Whites. To reach Peter Whites or his guest today, please call 1-866-472-5790. That's 1-866-472-5790. You may also send an email to peter@inblackandwhites.com. Whites is spelled W-E-I-T-Z. Email Peter at inblackandwhites.com. Now, back to this week's program.
Hi, thanks. Welcome back to the program. I'm joined by the owners of the Paradolia Brewing Company in Sebastian, Florida, and they're talking about how they turn their dream into a reality by manufacturing beer in their house and turning it into an actual bona fide business, to which they're going to open their first retail location and here in about two or 3 weeks. But prior to the break, what we were talking about is, how much beer they used to manufacture at home. And Pete mentioned the new hashtag, which is going to catch on, everybody, called Beer Broke. And he was saying that people used to just come over and drink his free beer. Well, now they're going to have to end up paying for it. But at home, you guys were making, you said, about 6 kegs a week. What's your capacity now going to be in your retail location?
Well, time permitting, our goal is to brew at least 2 to 3 days a week. And our current brewing system will make about a barrel, which is a U.S. barrel is about 31-gallon batches. We probably could brew up to maybe 40 gallons at a shot. So if we do that 2 or 3 times a week, we might make 120 plus something barrels per year now, just on the existing system.
And so you're looking at like a little over 100 gallons of beer a week.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you go through that, I thinking out loud about it, if you go through that, you got to have some pretty fresh beer. If it's, I'm drinking it several days after it's been brewed.
Oh yeah, you can't get it any fresher. As a matter of fact, part of the selling point for our particular business is we installed a brewing window behind the bar. So on days that we are going to be brewing, people will be able to sit in the pub at the bar and watch us back there, mashing in our grains and filling up our kegs and the fermenters full of beer, knowing that it's just on the other side of the wall is where that beer came from. So it doesn't get much fresher.
We were thinking about the
Go
sign
ahead.
window, like the donut shop has, brewing now in a big bright light, so people would know that was the day we were brewing.
Except there the donuts are hot and here the beer's cold.
Right, exactly. It doesn't get much fresher than that.
Yeah.
So now, I'm thinking about this, and, obviously I'm in South Florida, and we're in the midst of our summer, and I think I saw a statistic leading up to today that there have been 62 consecutive days where the temperature's been 90 degrees or greater, and this being our, hurricane/rainy season, factor in all the humidity, and we got some pretty uncomfortable weather. How's that impacting you all in the brewing business?
Well, it makes people thirsty, I can tell you that.
Well, that's actually, I didn't think about that. That's actually an even better point.
But yeah, as far as a big thing, as Jim said earlier, and I'll let Jim talk more to it, but yeah, temperature is huge with brewing beer.
Temperature control was actually one of our biggest problems in trying to set up the new brewery is how are we going to come up with a room that would hold, if we're doing ale, 68 degrees constantly, because with temperature fluctuations, your beer doesn't come out as well. You end up with off flavors. So we've installed a couple extra, a small unit in a sealed room, and we have a walk-in cooler, and that's how we're going to maintain our temperatures. Beer that's brewed warm is really nasty beer. I can tell you that.
Yeah. So is beer that's cold. So is beer that I'm drinking.
Yeah.
So basically the walk-in is going to be set at a certain constant temperature, and that's where it's going to ferment.
Actually, we have a fermentation room that we've put a small mini split air conditioner that can hold 68 degrees, and that's going to be the same room as our
the brew kettle.
Brew kettles. So that whole room itself will be held at a constant 68 degrees.
So we're essentially going to be brewing in our fermenting room.
Right. After the beer ferments, then we cold crash it in the cooler, And what that does is it settles out the yeast and makes the beer clear. So once after fermentation, after about 6 days of fermenting, then it's rolled into the cooler, and another 3 or 4 days it drops out clear, and at that point we would carbonate it and serve it.
So you bring up a great point, Jim, and that's something that's curious to me. So walk me through, as a complete, beer making for dummies person. Walk me through the process of how you actually make a beer.
It's a 3 or 4 step process. The first step is you have to mill your grain, which the grain comes in whole, and we crush it to a certain size. Depending on, it could be 2 or 3 different types of grain, depending on the color of the beer you want and the flavor you're looking for. And then you have to have a hot water tank, which you raise the temperature, we're going to say at this point, to 160 degrees, and you mash that grain in that 160-degree water for approximately between an hour and an half to extract the sugars from the grain. At that point, you move that mashed liquid, leaving the grain behind, into your boil tank, and you bring that up to a boil, and then you add your hops, and they can be added all at one time, or they can be added some in the beginning to give you a bittering, and then some later on in the process to give you different flavors, and you can add multiple different types of hops to give you the flavor you want. That boils again for 60 to 90 minutes, and at that point we run it through once it's done boiling, we run it through a chiller, which drops the temperature from boiling to about 70 degrees in about 5 or 10 minutes. And then that's pumped right into the fermenter. At that point, we add the yeast, which turns the wort into alcohol and carbon dioxide and eats up the sugars. And then that stays in there for about 6 days. Then it's transferred again into the crash tank to try to clear it up. And after a few days there, it's carbonated. So that would be the whole process.
And that whole process takes about how long?
From the start of brewing to the fermenter is about an 8-hour day, and then we've got a week in the fermenter. We're talking about a month actually between brewing, fermenting, aging, and carbonating. About a month.
Interesting. So essentially you're going to have something in the works in some kind of methodical way, so there's always new beer coming out.
Exactly.
Right. Everything's always in a rotation, so you're kind of overlapping. And really for us right now in our small space, because we are starting small, our biggest limitation really is space, because beer takes up space, and we only have so much room for our fermenters on site. So we can only make as much as we can ferment. If we wanted to just keep on chugging and brewing beer, indefinitely, we could do that, but we would just need a huge amount. And when people see those big breweries, maybe when they drive by, they see those big shiny tanks, the majority of those big shiny tanks are fermenters.
Right, and that's what takes up the space. So tell me then, your store, your retail store, let's call it your pub, is roughly how big?
It's only 1,200 square feet, including our brewing and fermenting room.
And how big, and how is that? Is that a 50-50 between, where people can sit and have a beer versus how much is that how you broke it up?
We can seat, on paper, we can seat about 49 people in the pub. A third of that is probably our brewing and walk-in cooler, and then we have a very small, maybe 10 by 10 food area where we're going to be able to at least serve some light food while people are there having a beer. It's always nice to have something to nibble on.
Right, and go ahead.
I was going to say we might have an ability to actually expand into another space if things go well early on. So we could jump in space.
And what are, fast forward 5 years, what are your growth plans? What do you want to happen from all this?
5 years from now, I would like to tell people a story about how I used to be an elementary school teacher, which I really loved doing, but now I really love making beer. I foresee us in a warehouse, maybe with a 10-barrel system, with a tasting room, and providing the pub with the beer we're making in the warehouse. And our pub system that we're currently going to start on will still be used as what we call a pilot system. If we want to experiment with new recipes, we can make smaller batches, and if people like it in the pub, we can scale that recipe up, and I would like to see distribution at that point too, maybe statewide into restaurants and bars across Florida.
And that's cool, and I think it's nice to have that vision. I certainly am looking forward to knocking down my first couple beers when the place opens.
Awesome.
So tell me now, and I want to talk more a little bit about, so you've built your whole business, you understand how to make your beer, and you've been doing it for many years, and now you're in the process of opening up your first location, your first pub. And what sort of things have you thought about from a marketing perspective? I mean, I know you've got this really cool mug that people can find on the website at ParadoliaBrewing.com, but just tell me how you think about this stuff.
Well, I would be lying if I said we're the first ones to have a mug club, but I'm not sure where the idea originated, but we were told by several places to go ahead and start a mug club because basically people come in, they have a numbered mug or their name on their mug, and it's theirs that stays in the pub. You get certain perks with that. You get extra beer every pour. Our mug members are going to get an extra hour of happy hour during the week. They get advance notice of new beers that we're releasing. And it guarantees that they have a place to come and they feel like they belong there, first and foremost. So that idea has been around for a while. We thought that would fit well with our plans. As far as marketing goes, when you're the only brewery in an area, word travels fast. We've been using Facebook. We did two online fundraisers, which your listeners may or may not be aware of what crowdsourcing is or crowdfunding. You can go on sites like RocketHub.com or Indiegogo.com. Anything you want to raise money for, you can set up a free account and tell people what your mission is and what your purpose for raising money is. So we made a short YouTube video telling our story, and we basically put it online to see if we could raise a little bit of funds that way. It also generated interest in what we were doing. So it was kind of a marketing tool as well as a fundraising tool.
Yeah, and that's pretty slick, and it kind of tells you that there's people out there that have an interest in your business and see it as a viable business, ongoing business concern. Right.
And you're getting exposure to the world, really, when you're putting yourself out there online. Our first contributor was a friend who lives out in Los Angeles, and just based on the fact that he knows how much I enjoy making beer, he was our first donor. So that's another way if people are looking to pursue their dream business, I would recommend going on one of the crowdfunding sites and read up and do your homework on that, because it's a really neat thing. People may just give you money because they like your idea. Whether it's profitable or not, they're not worried about. They may just like your story.
Well, and that's what's cool, and I think, obviously you made an interesting point. Passion speaks volume over anything else, and I think being able to get an investor who knows your passion for beer certainly speaks to how well and how successful they think you're going to be. With that, we're going to come back in just a minute. You're listening to the In Black and White's radio program on the Voice America Business Network.
Voice America Business Network. The bottom line in business.
ERISA 408B2, fiduciary standards, safe harbor, fidelity bonds, record keepers, discrimination testing. I am so confused.
Does your 401k plan have more questions than answers? Peter Weitz and his team of 401k experts have a solution. Their on-site service model distinguishes them from other service providers, and they are specialists in 401k costs, regulations, and compliance. If your 401k plan has more questions than answers, then contact Peter at 877-945-2888 or email him at peter@inblackandwhites.com.
Climbing Mount Everest is an amazing feat, and many have died trying to do so. However, more people have died descending Mount Everest than in reaching the summit. Part of the problem may be that people are so focused on reaching their objective that they fail to plan appropriately for what they will do or should be prepared for afterward. Similarly, people are so focused on saving for retirement and reaching retirement that they fail to plan appropriately for what they will encounter once they have actually retired. With 1 out of every 4 65-year-olds today living past the age of 90, you may be retired longer than you are actually working. Have you devised a plan, process, and discipline to ensure that you will not run out of money? If you are not sure what to do, then simply contact Peter Weitz and his retirement team at Fusion Analytics. We help manage human emotions using 3 proprietary investment techniques. Our job is to evaluate the forces that the typical investor can't see so that wealth is preserved and not lost. Find out more at inblackandwhites.com. Weitz is spelled W-E-I-T-Z. Email Peter at inblackandwhites.com. In Black and Whites, we win by not losing.
The business community's first choice in Internet Talk Radio. Voice America Business Network.
You are listening to In Black and Whites. To reach Peter Weitz or his guest today, please call 1-866-472-5790. That's 1-866-472-5790. You may also send an email to peter@inblackandwhites.com. Whites is spelled W-E-I-T-Z. Email Peter at inblackandwhites.com. Now, back to this week's program.
Hi, thanks. Welcome back to the show. I'm joined by Jim Squartino and Pete Anderson at the Pareidolia Brewing Company, and we've been spending the day talking about, how do you take your dream and turn it into reality? And these two guys have taken their love of beer making and turned it into a craft beer pub, which is going to open in a nice little town on the Atlantic coast in Florida in Sebastian, and they're going to call it the Pareidolia Brewing Company. And I just want to make a comment. I talked about it in the beginning of the show, but pareidolia is a word that they came up with, and it's essentially a psychological term for when we see faces or other objects in places that it doesn't really exist. And typically the most common is we see something in the clouds. We look at a cloud formation and we say, it looks like Homer Simpson or something like that. Or I always like to go with Gordon Shumway, my favorite Alf character. And he's always appearing in the clouds. But in any event, guys, I'm talking about this, and you came up with this idea, and, we're talking about marketing prior to the break. And, Pete, you came up with a great slogan, and I want to expand on it. But your slogan is, pareidolia is coming up with faces in places that don't exist. And your slogan of the beer place, your beer pub is, face it, beer is good. And, I want to, hear about how you came up with that, but also, make a comment to this, is that you're collecting, or you want people to email in pictures of their pareidolia experience that you're going to post on the website. And I think it's going to make a pretty cool sort of collage of funny pictures.
Absolutely. Once the idea came up for the name of the brewery, the concept of pareidolia I always found entertaining. Because we all do it. Apparently, when we're babies, the first thing we focus on is, whatever face is taking care of us. We see the eyes, the nose, and the mouth. And so I think we're all hardwired to see that. Once I realized that this would be a great name for a brewery, I thought, what a great concept. Because everybody seems to find faces here or there, how fun would it be to have people send us their pictures? And I've been receiving them from all over the country, and we've been putting them on our website as they come in. And if we really like it, we'll probably get it turned into a canvas transfer and put it in the pub as part of our decor, which is just really neat to see other people finding these faces in unusual places. And if they come to visit our pub and they've submitted a picture, don't be surprised if we have your picture hanging up in the pub, because it's just a fun thing. There's nothing serious about pareidolia. It's all about fun.
And that's the cool part about it. So make sure, where can they send their pictures, Pete?
They can send them to pareidolia@gmail.com, and you had spelled pareidolia earlier, so I won't bore them with that.
No, go ahead and spell it again.
PAREIDOLIA brewing@gmail.com.
And that's cool. And then the last thing I wanted to think about and what you did was you've got these really cool mugs. And before you tell about the genesis of the mug and how you came up with that, I want to point out that here it is. You're not open yet. You're a small business. You've done grassroots marketing through Facebook and Twitter and the social media sites, but not anything on any kind of scale. But yet you've got how many members of your mug club already?
We're limiting it to 50 right now, and we're down to probably maybe 6 left. And I agree with you. It's been interesting. We're not even open yet, but the following we already have has been tremendous. And I had looked around. I didn't want just anything to be our mug club. I wanted something really, really neat. And I located a mug maker up in Minneapolis, Minnesota, who hand makes all of these mugs with our logo embedded in them. So these are all handmade. None of them are the same. Each one is a work of art. And when I ordered them, I had ordered some extras, and I asked the gentleman, can you make these? And he goes, well, let me tell you, I can't give you a price right now, because once these things come out of the oven, sometimes they break. So I can't tell you whether you're going to get 49 mugs or 60 mugs, which I thought was pretty funny, but it goes back to the old, let's keep it local, made in the USA. I love that. I love the fact that this guy is hand-making these things up in a little shop in Minnesota.
Yeah, and they look like a dark beer that's sort of frothy, spilling over the top.
Exactly. That's what we were going for. They do. They look like a foaming beer on a big ceramic mug. And we thought, you referred to the weather here being so miserable lately. What a nice relief that's going to be to lift that thing up with, locally made craft beer and just enjoy the entire experience.
Yeah, and that's pretty slick. So you're basically how far away now from opening up?
I would say the soonest we could hope is probably 2 weeks. We do have those government entities that we mentioned earlier. Sometimes we're waiting on inspectors and some paperwork to be done. But ideally, we're going to be moving all of our equipment into the space next week.
And so is the beer already being made?
The test batches were made. However, the federal government said that we cannot make beer under our label officially until they have given us something called a brewer's certificate. So right now, all we have are the test batches to make sure that the system was going to work. But as soon as we get that brewer's certificate, we're going on a brewing marathon.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. That sounds great. Guys, I really appreciate you being on the program today. I love to hear stories about how, small business and following your dreams can come to become a reality. And obviously, I wish you nothing but the best of success.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
and if I could give any advice to people, it's follow your passion. It'll work out one way or the other.
Yeah. So before we sign off, give me why don't you just tell everybody the best ways that again how they can follow you both maybe through Twitter, Facebook, your website, and I know you gave out your email address.
Okay. The best way to probably follow our progress would be to go to the pareidoliabrewing.com. You can also Google Pareidolia Beer, Sebastian, Florida. We're updating our website regularly. We have a website designer, and he keeps track on that. Our address will be 482 U.S. Highway 1, and that is in Sebastian, Florida. We're about 20 minutes south of Melbourne, Florida, and about 20 minutes north of Vero Beach, Florida. But since we're going to be the first brewery in the area, I'm sure you can just ask anybody, do they know where the brewery is? It should be pretty easy to find.
And that's great, guys. And again, I wish you the best of luck. I think what I'd like to do is, if I can, I'd love to have you back on the program in a few months and hear about your progress. I think the listeners would really like to understand, some of the trials and tribulations and some of the success stories.
That would be awesome. We'd be happy to come back.
Yeah, great. Thanks a lot, guys. I really appreciate you being on the program. Next week on the show, we're going to talk a little bit more about the markets as we get into sort of the lazy days of summer. But this has been a great show for me. I love hearing stories of great success and of people following your dreams. This has been a great week, a great show, and make sure you tune in and listen next week. It's going to be equally as interesting. You're listening to the In Black and White's radio program on the Voice America Business Network. Make it a great week.
Thank you again for tuning in to In Black and Whites. Please join your host, Peter Weitz, again next Tuesday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time and 7 a.m. Pacific Time for another edition of the program on the Voice America Business Channel. Have a safe week.